certainly threat assessment, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So Steve, the floor is yours.
So, just by way of hands, how many of you in the last 2 months have read about a data breach or a compromise of a company? All right, keep those hands up. How many of you, from a corporate perspective, were affected by one of those? How many of you personally? So this is a problem. And the question really is, why are we still losing the InfoSec battle? So let's take a look at some of the numbers, and I think the numbers will really start to illuminate the problem. According to a couple of studies, for the last 6-7 years, InfoSec teams have gotten about 20% more effective at closing down vulnerabilities, finding the adversaries, discovering the APTs, basically doing their jobs. So from one perspective, that sounds pretty good. Double-digit growth. If we all had that, we'd all be doing really well, right? Over that same period of time, the adversaries have gotten between 75 and 80% more effective at deploying those attacks, at getting those APTs in. So we are absolutely losing the battle. And the other thing to keep in mind is every one of those companies you raised your hand because you read about or you yourself were affected, they had firewalls, they had antivirus, they had information security teams, they had all of the tools of the trade. And yet we're still losing the battle by a significant amount. And so how do we get ahead of this curve? So what I'm going to put forth to you now is what I believe to be the 3 key pillars for how we're going to successfully get ahead of the curve and get cyber threat intelligence and defense to catch up and maybe do better. So the first is an area that we at Intel are really involved in, and that's analytics. You have to have insight, you have to be able to understand what's going on in your environment, but the reality is that we've had threat logs, we've had syslog, we've had lots of information in our SIMs, our security event managers. There's just too much information. And there's too much nonsense, in the noise in the channel as well. So this is where analytics is a really important part of the puzzle. It's going to help set us free because it allows us to then apply these analytic tools to the data we're collecting on our networks, both security data as well as normal information flow, net flow data, and the like, to get at what is that truly interesting piece of anomalous activity. Correlating that with either data that's important, a system that's important, or a threat actor that's trying to attack us. So analytics is the foundation about how we're going to start to get better insight into our environment and start to get ahead of the curve. And of course, analytics requires the right infrastructure to be able to support it. And if you want to go to Intel's website, you can look up all the wonderful things we do about making analytics really fast. But analytics alone will not solve this problem. It will give us better insight, but that still doesn't allow us to do anything with that information. And that's where the second pillar, and probably one of the most important pillars, and what I'm going to spend the time here talking about, is automation is crucial and important. Because without automation, you have no action. And with all that information at your disposal now, because of the wonderful analytics you've all deployed, how do you actually execute on it? How do we get that done? And this is where the automation is a really crucial part, because as it was shown in the prior presentations, automation can touch every part of your environment, from DevOps to networking, to your deployed systems, to your controls. And so it gives you the opportunity to apply change, to fix problems, to be able to do something throughout the enterprise. And that is crucial. Because if we just secure our networks, we still have all those breaches. If we just secure the endpoints, we still have all those breaches. We've got to take a holistic approach. And at the same time, how many people believe that their InfoSec teams are adequately funded and have enough team members? Yeah, me neither. In one of his last speeches before he retired, DoD CIO Terry Havison was asked, what's the one problem that you're leaving for the next person to take your role? And that one problem he said was lack of cyber talent. They don't have enough people, and they're having a hard time retaining people that can perform the information security tasks within the DoD. And what he said is indicative across the board. There's not enough people to deal with the sheer volume of things. And so this is where automation is crucial. Because number one, you don't want to take that precious few talent you have and have them working on tons of things. You want to focus them on the top 5% most important, most critical, or weirdest looking thing in your enterprise. You want to automate the stupid stuff. And I say that full-heartedly knowing that a lot of that is going to be the things that we sort of, in the information security world, take for granted as part of our jobs. But that's the important thing. That shouldn't be part of a job. You shouldn't be touching anything manual. If If it's deploying a firewall rule, updating patches, those things have to be automated, or we're going to continue to still see those statistics where we're constantly falling behind. And so automation will set you free. And then the last piece of the puzzle is information sharing. And information sharing, and a lot of people, if you go to an InfoSec talk, they'll talk about sharing compromises, sharing indicators, sharing threat data. That's old hat. We could do that and still would be losing. One of the things that I'm really excited about working with Ansible is that you can share best practices. You can share your automation scripts for how you built and how you deploy those patches. That's the automation that's really going to allow us to catch up, is when we can share in those community meetups or online how you patched your systems, how you configured your network, how you automated the network configuration to deal with a certain threat. When you can share that information and we can collectively raise the bar to keep the hackers and keep the nation states out, together we can make the world a better and a safer place. And we can do that by sharing the automation, not just automating for ourselves, because one of the things you have to realize, we don't live in isolated silos. If they're attacking one bank, they're attacking all banks. If they're attacking one government agency, they're attacking all government agencies. And the reality is we're all interconnected. And so if bank A goes down, you can be sure that that same attack is following through to bank B, bank C. So if we're all working together to share best practices, then we raise the bar for us all together. And then we can get ahead of the curve. So let's dive into just a little bit of what is automation for enhanced for security. Well, if you think about some of the normal kinds of functions that you do in security, it's update and patching, which is the definition of stupid stuff. And anybody will tell you that. Automation and the patching and updates that you need to do, whether it be from Patch Tuesday kind of updates, or you found a new vulnerability, you need to patch a driver, that's the kind of thing that no human being should be involved with at this day and age. Number one, there's just too many to keep track of. Typically within an enterprise, they'll have a ticket list of hundreds to thousands of updates and patches. And what will typically happen is that someone will say, well, what are the top 20 that we can work on? And so that's great, you tackle the top 20, and all those others are still waiting to be fixed, which increases the window of exposure. To give you an example from way back when, and this is one that I was actively involved with in helping companies protect themselves, was SQL Slammer. How many remember SQL Slammer? A couple of you old enough, okay. SQL Slammer was an attack that came out and took down SQL servers, did all sorts of damage. The most interesting thing wasn't how fast it propagated, which was pretty fast at the time, but with the fact that the vulnerability had been not only known, but there was a patch available for over a year, available out and publicized, that never got patched because there was no active attack. It didn't bubble up to the top of the list. And so all those systems that were taken down could have been fixed a year in advance of the actual attack. And here's the scariest thing. There are still sites out there today, 10, 11 years later, that are still vulnerable to SQL Slammer. Because it's not top of the priority list and you only have 5 people who can do the job. So automation is going to be crucial to getting those patches and updates out there. The other thing that is really important, we're seeing some of this happen in the cloud spaces, and so if you've got private clouds or if you've got enterprise systems, a lot of times it takes a while to figure out what that really cool, nifty new attack that they're going to talk about in all the newspapers is. What's the APT? But you see the anomalous activity. One of the mechanisms is, after you've done the forensics, refresh the node. Just start over. Don't try to fix it, don't try to patch it. Being able to automate swapping out your systems and keeping them fresh, getting rid of the corrupted memory. And so what we're seeing some really good best practices around is automating the constant refresh of your systems, regardless if they're attacked or not. And by just keeping them refreshed, keeping them restarted, you get better hygiene within the system. Dynamic security control, software-defined networking. We were talking earlier about the networking. This is really important to be able to deploy updates and security controls to throttle attacks and be able to do it in real time, as opposed to in trouble ticket time. Another key thing is that as the dynamic environment changes around us, as we get more vulnerabilities, we see more attacks, what is a security baseline? What is the gold image needs to change? And for anyone who's ever had to manage a gold image process, it's a pain in the neck, and it requires a lot of testing. But if we can automate the update to that baseline and then push that baseline out more quickly, then we get the people using those systems a better security baseline to begin with. And then finally, something that hopefully you don't ever have to deal with, but when the auditors come in, if you can automate their compliance, that means they're bothering you less. And so giving them the information they need without having to take 2 days of your time is a great thing. And so automating the compliance reporting, automating the STIG compliance or the PCI compliance reporting is another key area where automation will help. So at the end of the day, what it gets us is the benefits of real-time threat response and mitigation. And so instead of a trouble ticket and someone getting it on their desk and then trying to figure out what's going on, you can automate that process from when the threat intelligence and analytics systems identifies a problem to closing the problem. And then let the forensics do what they need to do without having to keep the attack open. And most importantly, keep the human out of the loop. When it comes to mitigations and response, by keeping the human out of the loop, we would close the window of exposure and ultimately reduce our risk while we're under active attack and active campaigns. And I can't stress enough that even if we did all the automation in the world, really, as a collective community, it's not until we start sharing our best practices, sharing our scripts, sharing what we've done in Ansible to push out these best practices is going to be key to closing that gap. And so at the end of the day, the whole goal here is to be able to get us to be at least as efficient as the hacker. We may never get there, but if we can get at least as efficient as the hacker, we'll be able to catch up and reduce our windows of exposure. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
So you see how that fit in, right? It's awesome. Okay, so here's kind of the rough agenda. We're going to take a quick break. Plan on being back in your seats and ready to go by about 11:15. And while you're grabbing another cup of coffee or hitting the bathroom, feel free to talk amongst your friends about what your favorite module is.